When I looked at the sender's name on the letter delivered to my mailbox, it was written Violet.
Violet!
I blurted out without thinking. I hurried back to the living room. Why now? Why did I receive a letter from Violet? There's no use just thinking about it. I carefully opened the letter. There were several writing papers in it. Taking out only the writing paper, I continued reading while imagining of Violet's face. To Mom. It described the circumstances that had led Violet to her current situation. And at the end, these words were written. Please take revenge on my husband Andrew for me. That's my last request. Violet. As I finished reading, a single tear fell onto the table. Feeling a sense of powerless anger, I clenched the letter in my hand. At the same time, I resolved to take revenge in place of Violet. Andrew, you were only pretending to be a good person. It's my fault for not realizing it. So, I'll commend you for deceiving me until now. But that ends here. You made a fatal mistake. For taking away my dear daughter, I'll make you regret it until the end of your life. I bit my lip and reached for my mobile phone. My name is Scarlett. I work as an insurance agent at a major insurance company. After losing my husband early, I worked hard for my daughter Violet. It was often difficult, but thinking of Violet somehow gave me the strength to keep going. Then, about half a year ago, Violet told me she was getting married. Violet's at that age now. Violet had just turned 24. Now that I am 53 years old, I was feeling my age more and more. But there's no time for rest. Marriage is expensive, after all. Violet's wedding is next month. No time to rest. I wanted to help her for the wedding expenses and prepare a celebration. Maybe soon, I would have grandchildren. It was hard, but also incredibly joyful. But misfortunes come in times of happiness. That day, the phone call I received was just the thing. Violet's. The caller was a police officer. With a slightly strained voice, he informed me that Violet had passed away. Stunned, I let my mobile phone slip from my grasp. Her wedding was coming soon, why did Violet? Those thoughts raced through my mind. About a week later, I received an unexpected letter from Violet. I didn't know how Violet had died until I read this letter. Violet's letter began with a meeting her future husband, Andrew. I heard that Violet and Andrew met at the confectionery shop where she worked. Indeed, Violet loved making sweets. Probably because her best friend's family owned a confectionery shop. She got interested after enjoying their delicious treats and started making her own. Putting that aside, Violet went to a local culinary school after high school to study confectionery formally. She seriously learned confectionery skills there, and she got a job at a confectionery chain with several stores in the state. Nice to meet you. I'm Andrew, I'll train you. I've got a bit more experience, but feel free to talk to me. Andrew, a bit older, became Violet's supervisor when she started her job. Turns out, Andrew was the son of the president of the confectionery company that owned the shop where Violet worked. Incidentally, whenever Violet was scolded by other pastry chefs, Andrew quickly defended her. She's new, there's no need to be so harsh. Of course, everyone knew Andrew was the president's son. So, when he said something like that, no one could oppose him. On the other hand, Violet found Andrew, who defended her, to be very reliable. Soon, a trust developed between them, and it was only a matter of time before it turned into romantic feelings. Eventually, about a year after she started working, Andrew confessed his feelings to Violet. That's how they started dating and gradually deepened their relationship. But Violet wasn't just focused on romance. She diligently worked as a pastry chef. During work, she followed the instructions of Andrew and her superiors, and after hours, she practiced to improve her skills. Sometimes Andrew would join her for practice. It seemed those moments were important in strengthening their bond. By the time they started dating, Violet had become a competent pastry chef. But all of this was part of Andrew's scheme. Violet only realized this after they started dating. Time passed, and a few months ago, Andrew approached Violet with a proposal. Violet, a sweets exhibition will be held in 3 months, right? I need to discuss something about that. The sweets exhibition? The one at the department store downtown? I heard popular confectionaries will be selling their treats there. Yes, that one. Apparently, there's been a vacancy, and suddenly our shop is participating. Andrew spoke with a hint of confusion. Violet tilted her head. Our shop is popular, right? Is there any problem? We have to come up with a new dessert. We also need to create next season's new items. I see. Violet understood. Confectionery shops often introduce new items each season. For instance, treats for events like Valentine's Day or Christmas are needed. We have our wedding next month. I can't take on more. That's why I wanted to hear your ideas, Violet. Andrew clasped his hands together, making a pleading gesture. Violet sighed softly. Can't be helped. I'll bring my recipe notebook tomorrow. That would be a great help. Make sure you let everyone know it is my idea. That's all they talked about at that time. But the next day, an incident occurred. After work, Violet took her recipe notebook and headed to the kitchen. Sorry to keep you waiting. She entered the kitchen. But Andrew was nowhere to be seen. Maybe he's still working? Being the company heir must be busy. Thinking this, Violet decided to wait for Andrew. While looking through her recipe notebook, she suddenly felt someone's presence behind her. Andrew? Were you working? Violet turned around. But Andrew wasn't there. Oh? Violet? What are you doing here? Ah, Mr. Carter. It was Mr. Carter. He worked for the confectionery company but wasn't a pastry chef. He was more of an office worker, handling tasks like accounting. It seemed he came to lock up. Do you still have something to do here? Yes. I'm here to help Andrew with his work. Andrews. Oh, I see. Mr. Carter laughed unpleasantly. Was he thinking something bad? Sensing this, Violet's expression soured. Suddenly, Mr. Carter shouted.
Even if you're dating the boss's son, I can't overlook such behavior from an employee. I'm not. I was just... quiet. Don't make excuses.
Mr. Carter advanced towards her. In a reflex, Violet threw him her recipe notebook.
Ah.
Mr. Carter covered his face and crouched down. Andrew came there. What's going on? I heard a loud noise, Violet. Are you okay? What happened? Andrew. It's just... Violet explained everything to Andrew. But, in reality, nothing had happened. Mr. Carter had just found that Violet and Andrew were meeting up. He jumped to unsavory conclusions on his own. Violet, upset by such bizarre suspicions, wore an annoyed expression. This displeased Mr. Carter, who attempted to reprimand her. So you threw Mr. Carter the recipe notebook, and he ended up like this. Yes, I'm sorry. Violet apologized. Meanwhile, Andrew checked on Mr. Carter. The area hit by the notebook was turning red. But luckily, there were no serious injuries. I'll report this to the president. You'll be fired immediately. That's not fair. Shut up. Brace yourself. Mr. Carter shouted angrily. Then Mr. Carter hurried out of the kitchen. What should I do, Andrew? It's okay. I'll handle it. But if it gets reported to your father, our relationship might be opposed. Violet was most afraid of that. Don't worry. I'll always protect you. Andrew, leave it to me. Later, this incident reached the president's ears. But Violet faced no punishment. It was because Andrew had intervened. Andrew protected me. Violet thought so. Their relationship seemed to grow even stronger. But all of this was also part of Andrew's scheme. A few days later, Violet would come to realize the whole truth. After the kitchen argument, Andrew said something to Violet. "I feel bad asking this, Violet, but can you keep quiet about providing the idea?" "Why?" "You know, because of the matter of Mr. Carter." On the day of the incident, Andrew was alone in the kitchen. While Andrew was working on a new creation, Mr. Carter came in. There was an accident during Andrew's work, and a cooking utensil hit Mr. Carter's face. Andrew wanted to make it seem like that's what had happened. Reluctantly, Violet agreed. "Sorry, Violet. It's actually your recipe. I'll return the notebook later." "It's okay. You coordinated everything to protect me." "Well, yeah. If that's the story we're going with," Mr. Carter agreed to it. Andrew spoke of the effort it took to align their testimonies. Violet felt deeply grateful to Andrew for his efforts on her behalf. However, a few days later, Violet, who had stayed late to clean up, was about to leave after changing. Passing by the office, she heard Andrew's voice. "Andrew's still here. I should say hello." But as she was about to enter, she froze at Andrew's words.
And that's how it went. Thanks to you, Mr. Carter.
"Mr. Carter, what does that mean?" Pondering, Violet listened closely to Andrew's voice. Soon, she heard Andrew's laughter. Then, his true feelings came out. "Violet's just a convenient tool. Now that I've got her recipes, I don't need her anymore." Violet was stunned. Was I deceived? She covered her mouth, trying hard not to make a sound. But she couldn't stop the tears from flowing. That recipe is really good. It's a waste to let that woman keep it. From there, she could only listen to the truth she didn't want to hear, in Andrew's gleeful voice. He had ordered other pastry chefs to scold Violet. Then he would intervene, earning Violet's trust. He also set up the situation with Mr. Carter, making Violet feel indebted and trapped. And in the confusion of that moment, he was glad to have stolen Violet's recipes. Andrew said that. And then he added, "If she tries to escape, I'll just confront her with a shocking truth." Andrew smiled unpleasantly.
What does he mean?
Violet wondered as Andrew answered himself. It's about fraud. She's already complicit in it without knowing. Andrew sneered. At that moment, Violet's mobile phone fell from her pocket. It made a sound as it hit the floor, and Andrew noticed the phone. Violet could see this through the gap in the door.
I have to get away,
she thought, but her legs wouldn't move. Andrew quickly spotted Violet. He looked at her with a menacing expression.
Were you listening?
Well, it doesn't matter. If you try to run, I'll just accuse you. Andrew's lips curled into a smirk. Violet felt an intense fear of that smile. After that, Violet, unable to escape from Andrew, led a life dictated by him. She was also boldly made to help with the fraud he mentioned. However, Violet, being inherently honest and kind, couldn't endure such a life. Eventually, about a month later, Violet was found on the first floor of her apartment. There were no witnesses, but a passerby had heard a loud noise. When they checked, they found Violet lying below her room. According to the police, it's likely Violet did it herself. However, Andrew's laptop was found nearby. Perhaps Violet intended to expose Andrew's fraud by doing so. But the police examined the laptop and found no noteworthy data. I had suspected Andrew, who lived with her, from the moment I heard of the incident. However, on that day, Andrew was not at home. He was out of state for work. So, Andrew couldn't be the culprit. I had no choice but to accept that. Afterward, along with Andrew and his parents, we completed Violet's funeral. Even after everything ended, I remained in a daze. I couldn't bring myself to do anything. If only my husband were here, maybe he could have helped ease the loneliness. Violet, why? That was all I could mutter. I felt powerless. For several days, I cried, thinking that. Then, a week passed after Violet's death. I had to accept the reality of losing Violet. Just as I was beginning to come to terms with it, a letter arrived. When I looked at the sender's name on the letter delivered to my mailbox, it was written Violet.
Violet!
I blurted out without thinking. I hurried back to the living room. Why now? Why did I receive a letter from Violet? There's no use just thinking about it. I carefully opened the letter. There were several writing papers in it. Taking out only the writing paper, I continued reading while imagining a Violet's face. To Mom. It detailed the circumstances that had led Violet to her situation. The truth Violet penned ignited anger in me. It meticulously described how she was deceived by Andrew, her recipes stolen and forced into fraud. And finally, there was this line written in the letter.
Please take revenge on Andrew for me. That's my last request, Violet.
As I finished reading, a single tear fell onto the table. I clenched the letter, overwhelmed by a sense of powerless anger. At the same time, I resolved to take revenge on behalf of Violet. Andrew, you were only pretending to be a good person. It's my fault for not realizing it. So, I'll commend you for deceiving me until now. But that ends here. You made a fatal mistake. For taking away my dear daughter, I'll make you regret it until the end of your life. I bit my lip and reached for my mobile phone. I quickly arranged for a taxi. Violet's letter had an address written on it. There must be something important there.
Violet. I should go here, right?
Clutching the letter, I jumped into the taxi. Heading to the address. It was a local bank. According to Violet's letter, there seems to be something in a safe deposit box. I showed my ID to the staff and explained the situation. I also showed the bank card and key for the safe deposit box. The staff then led me to the safe deposit box. Violet had apparently told them I would be coming. I opened the box in the room I was led to. Inside were documents and a notebook. This is. I quietly read on. The documents were written by Violet. They detailed the methods and content of the fraud, and the people involved in it. The notebook was Violet's recipe notebook, containing recipes of products sold at Andrew's shop.
Violet, you did all this.
Even just from this, I could tell Violet's meticulous nature. Tears flowed as I thought of Violet. But I couldn't just sit and mourn. I quickly put the documents and notebook into my bag. Then, I noticed some jewelry. It was a heart-shaped pendant with a yellow sticky note attached. Treating it so carelessly, you wouldn't do that, Violet. Muttering, I carefully picked up the pendant. Then I saw the words on the sticky note. Instantly, I was shocked and disturbed. I clutched the pendant tightly.
Violet, I'll definitely take revenge. Just wait.
With renewed determination, I left the bank. I headed straight to a local confectionery shop. It was the family shop of Wendy, Violet's close friend. Wendy, whom I had seen at Violet's funeral, was at the shop front. Hello, Wendy. Violet's mom? About the other day. Wendy hugged me, and I hugged her back. There's something I want to talk about. Do you have a moment? Wendy looked towards the back. A man, presumably Wendy's father, nodded. Then, please come this way. Wendy led me to the back of the shop. The back was a residence. I was taken to the living room. As Wendy served coffee, I spoke abruptly. Actually, I received a letter from Violet.
From Violet?
Wendy was surprised and confused. Read it first. We'll talk after that. I handed Violet's letter to Wendy. Wendy read it silently, with great concentration. Eventually, she, like me, was in tears. Then, she handed the letter back to me. Thank you. I'll give this back to you first. So, what do you think?
We can't forgive him. I won't.
Wendy clenched her fist. I felt relieved knowing Wendy shared my feelings. Will you help me then?
Yes. But what should I do?
You're Violet's best friend, so you know about this, right? I showed her Violet's recipe notebook from the safe deposit box. Wendy immediately affirmed. This was in the safe deposit box, but the moment I saw the contents of the box, it was as if someone had whispered an idea to me. I decided to use it as part of my plan for revenge against Andrew, as Violet's wish. I explained the plan to Wendy. Then, I entrusted Violet's recipe notebook to her. Can you do this for me? For Violet's sake, yes. Wendy strongly agreed. That's the first step prepared. I felt a bit relieved. Then I quietly stood up and shook hands with Wendy. Thank you, I'm counting on you. Saying this, I left Wendy's place. I headed to another location. It was a branch of the confectionery shop where Violet used to work. The shop was quite far from the one where Violet had worked. I spent a lot of time getting there. Upon entering, I asked a woman who looked like a part-time employee. Excuse me, is Mr. Carter here? The woman looked puzzled. Then I added, my daughter worked at another shop and was helped by Mr. Carter. I showed her the employee card given to me by Andrew after Violet's funeral. The woman immediately smiled. Soon Mr. Carter came out from the back. Seeing my face, he turned pale. He recognized me as Violet's mother from the funeral. Can we talk outside for a bit? If you refuse, you know what will happen, right? I smiled at him, deliberately gentle. Thanks to that, Mr. Carter agreed readily. We moved to a nearby park, and Mr. Carter immediately apologized.
I'm so sorry. I was threatened too.
What are you talking about?
I mean,
Mr. Carter, without being asked, started confessing everything he had done. He was only approached by Andrew under threat, and he had no choice but to call out Violet. He wasn't involved in anything else. It was all Andrew who dragged him into evil. He never thought Violet would take her own life. Mr. Carter apologized to me, crying.
Apologies won't change anything. Violet will never come back.
I couldn't help but raise my voice. Mr. Carter closed his mouth, frightened. Realizing I said too much, I took a deep breath. Then, with a stern look, I asked Mr. Carter. If you're willing to apologize, will you do me a favor? Yes.
Then, please testify about this incident. And don't say anything to Andrew. Understood?
Once confirmed, Mr. Carter agreed, though fearfully. Afterward, I had Mr. Carter testify everything. I recorded all of it and even let him write and sign a statement of his testimony. That's the second step done. Now, Wendy, I'm counting on you. I muttered softly, watching Mr. Carter's dejected figure return to the store. After a while, I received an invitation from Andrew.
A sweets exhibition.
It was the invitation to the very sweets exhibition. Andrew didn't know I was aware of the truth. So, the invitation boldly included these words. We'll be showcasing sweets Violet praised highly. Please come for Violet's sake. I almost tore it up in anger. But the preparations would all be for nothing by doing so. I managed to restrain myself and waited for the day of the sweets exhibition. Day after day. I watched the calendar. Finally, the first day of the sweets exhibition arrived. I went to the venue with Violet's employee card on my chest. Upon entering, Andrew greeted me. He approached with a dubious smile, offering a handshake. Scarlett, I'm glad you could make it. Yes. Violet was looking forward to it, wasn't she? Yes. I've prepared my masterpiece for this occasion. He guided me to a display filled with magnificent cakes and chocolates. I asked Andrew with a forced smile. Which ones did you make? This time, I made chocolates. Valentine's Day is coming up, after all. Andrew pointed to chocolates in the center of the display. Stylishly decorated chocolates. But these were made from Violet's recipes. Thinking that made me seethe with anger. Then, a woman's voice came from behind. May I interview you? I turned to see a woman holding a file. apparently a magazine journalist, with a camera. Andrew and the woman talked. After a while, the woman tilted her head, puzzled. "Excuse me, are you sure you made these?" Andrew was taken aback by her words. Then he retorted with a sneer.
Of course I did. What are you talking about? But I saw similar ones at another store. What? What do you mean?
Andrew raised his voice. Several guests in the venue turned to look. The woman continued.
The explanation and design are very similar. That's impossible. Which store is that?
Andrew's voice grew louder. The woman, though scared, pointed to a distant location. Andrew rushed off. And I quickly followed. Soon, we arrived in front of a certain store. There, Wendy was standing by the storefront. Wendy nodded slightly when she saw me. Then she addressed Andrew. "Long time no see."
It's you. You stole our shop's recipes.
Stole? That's not true. Wendy smiled. Meanwhile, Andrew, red-faced, raised his voice.
Then what's this? It's almost identical to our product.
He pointed to chocolates lined up. Almost identical to those in his shop. Then Andrew pointed to a sign at the storefront and shouted.
And this? Doesn't melt easily even in warm places. What's this about?
It's our newly developed product.
Don't joke with me. This is exactly the same as the unique method I devised.
Andrew's voice stirred up murmurs among the bystanders. But Wendy, undisturbed, retorted. That's just a coincidence. But if it's the same, please stop using it at your shop. What did you say?
This is made using a patented method developed by my father years ago. Patented method?
Andrew's face turned pale. Actually, Violet's recipe used that patented method. But Violet had no intention of infringing the patent. It is because she planned to sell it with Wendy.
This is a recipe Violet came up with for our future shop together. That's... You stole the recipe from Violet.
Wendy's words silenced Andrew. Clearly losing his composure, Andrew was questioned by the earlier woman.
What about it? Did you steal the recipe? No, Violet was our employee, Anne.
Andrew started making inconsistent excuses. But nobody believed him. Eventually, Andrew was unable to withstand the surrounding gazes, and he fled the scene. I quickly followed Andrew. The woman from earlier also followed. Returning to his shop space, Andrew began hurriedly packing up. Apparently, he intended to act as if nothing had happened. But I wouldn't allow it. I approached Andrew.
Wait! We're not done talking. So, Violet provided the recipe. What's your complaint? I have one. What you did wasn't just that, was it? Just that, what do you mean?
Sweat beaded on Andrew's forehead. Knowing this was a critical moment, I raised my voice.
Your shop has been evading taxes. Ah.
Andrew instinctively covered his mouth. The surrounding gazes intensified on him. I continued, calmly detailing Andrew's actions.
First, you kept a separate record of pre-ordered products, not accounting for them in sales. I don't know what you're talking about. Moreover, you falsified inventory records for raw materials. That's how you evaded taxes, right? I don't know anything about that.
Andrew attempted to deny loudly. I then produced a copy of the documentation Violet had compiled.
Violet detailed the method here. Look at this.
I scattered the documents on the spot. Several people rushed to pick them up. They began comparing and discussing among themselves. Soon, the journalist questioned Andrew.
What about this? According to these documents, her story seems true.
Andrew was silent in response to the journalist's question. Soon, similar voices arose from the audience.
I work in accounting, and this is clearly fraud. It's definitely tax evasion.
Faced with these accusations, Andrew's patience finally snapped.
Shut up. None of this concerns you. I didn't do anything. This can't be evidence.
Andrew's outburst silenced the crowd. In the midst of this, I took out my mobile phone. Then, I played a certain audio recording. Listen up. Mark the inventory as less.
But that would mean... Don't argue with me. You can't escape this now.
The voices of Violet and Andrew echoed in the venue. People from afar also started to gather closer. The recording continued. What about today's pre-order receipts? I destroyed them. They were cash payments, convenient for fudging the sales. That's again?
Shut up. If we paid taxes properly, we'd never make any money.
The recording ended with those words from Andrew. I glanced and saw Andrew's face had turned ashen.
This recording was in a pendant Violet had. It was an IC recorder. That heart-shaped one?
Yes.
It was an IC recorder. Violet left it as irrefutable evidence.
Andrew crumbled. Then, a security guard arrived with a police officer. The officer looked at Andrew and me, then asked Andrew, who was almost collapsing.
I've heard quite a bit. Is it true that you were evading taxes? No. That is... We'll ask you more thoroughly at the police station. For now, would you please come with us?
The officer spoke calmly to Andrew. But his eyes were not kind. I handed the officer Mr. Carter's testimony. Then I told him about Violet's suicide.
I understand. We'll investigate that as well,
the officer said, casting a stern glance at Andrew. But Andrew had no strength left to argue. Afterward, Andrew was arrested on charges of tax evasion and other offenses. Violet's case was also thoroughly investigated. However, it wasn't that Andrew directly caused Violet's death. In the end, he was only charged with assault for Violet's case. Nevertheless, the arrest had a significant impact. In just a few months, Andrew's father's confectionery company was driven into bankruptcy. Naturally, all the operating stores were closed. The shop where Violet worked became a rented space. I don't know what will happen to Andrew's sentencing, but I hope he reflects on his actions. After Andrew was taken away by the police, Wendy distributed the chocolates to the people at the venue. These chocolates were designed by my best friend. While handing them out, I wished Violet could have seen this. Especially the customers smiling as they tasted the chocolates. Violet would have loved to see that. Tears welled up in my eyes. But I had no time to cry. Because the sale of those chocolates had been decided. We want to name the product Violet. Because it's a light violet color, and most importantly, it was Violet's idea. Wendy spoke with a smile. Then she added, "Would you write the product tag for us? We want to display it with Violet's photo at the store." So, for the first time in my life, I started working on creating a store display tag. I hope Violet would like it. Speaking to Violet's smiling photo, I reached for a light purple-colored pencil.
You're the housekeeper, so you do all the cooking, cleaning, and nursing. If you don't like it, get a divorce and get out.
Brian made it clear that I was his housekeeper. So that was your plan all along. I'm free labor, a housekeeper. On top of that, I'm also expected to look after your mother, Sarah.
Of course, we got married, and you're my wife. You're not cut out for it if you don't like it. Pack your bags and leave. I can divorce you anytime.
It must have been his final warning. Brian said it with a nasty smirk.
Listen, I'm an elite from a prestigious company. You're only just getting by with that pathetic business, thanks to me.
Remember that. All right, then. I whispered, and it seemed to reach Brian.
As long as you understand. Remember, do as I say.
Without responding, I turned my back on Brian and muttered quietly again. Then consider yourself fired.
What?
As a result of my actions, my elite husband. My name is Helen. 30 years old. I own a restaurant. People say it's impressive to be an owner at this young age, but the place was originally my father's, and I just took over. The chef, who's been with us since my father's time, is the one who actually cooks in the kitchen, preserving the flavors that have been cherished since its establishment. With the help of such longtime staff, I've somehow managed to keep the restaurant running. I'm still in the learning process. I took over the restaurant at the age of 22, right after graduating from college. Instead of getting a job, I was immediately entrusted with it from my father. I graduated from the economics department, so I thought I had learned a lot, but reality doesn't always follow the textbooks. Despite numerous failures, and my fair share of bad days, I've managed to keep the restaurant going to this day. I thought I was pretty lucky. About 5 years after I took over the restaurant, a man started coming regularly. It was Brian, who would later become my husband. Once, a group of men in suits came over. Brian was one of them. He said that he liked the food, and started coming as a regular customer. Brian and his colleagues were employees of a major food manufacturer, and they said they were visiting various restaurants for research. I've had my eye on this restaurant for a while, but I usually go to the bigger ones in town, or in the suburbs, so I always pass this place by. Oh, I understand. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere. As I said that, Brian laughed sheepishly. I remember thinking he seemed honest and rather nice. My restaurant is indeed in such an odd location. But the taste is so good that many people have fallen in love with it and have been coming back for decades.
It's delicious, I've become quite the fan,
Brian confessed. True to his word, Brian became a regular customer and started talking a lot with me, the owner. Brian graduated from a top university and worked at a renowned company. He was the epitome of an elite. I had never been close to someone like that before. Not only was Brian brilliant at what he did, but he also had good looks. He was tall and slender with a well-defined face. Undoubtedly, he was the type who would be popular. Brian was 7 years older than me, so he was 34 at the time. I assumed he was married due to his age, but he laughed and said he was single. I've been living a life of work, and more work, and before I know it, I'm at this age. How silly of me. His easygoing manner, humorous conversation, and gentle tone made it seem like he wasn't an elite. Before I knew it, I had fallen for Brian. It was probably unrequited love. In his eyes, I was just the restaurant owner, and he was a regular patron. But then, out of the blue, he proposed to me.
Helen, would you consider being in a relationship with me, with marriage in mind?
I couldn't believe it. My heart was pounding. Could such a wonderful person really have feelings for me? It felt like a dream. Like Prince Charming had come for me. I felt like the protagonist of a fairy tale, and intoxicated by that dream, I accepted. A year later, I married Brian. But this fairy tale didn't end with, and they lived happily ever after. After we got married, the next chapter of the story turned into something much darker, like a picture book painted over completely in black. Hey, you're my wife now. You understand what that means, right? Brian said this soon after we started living together as a married couple. Yes, we got married, so I'm your wife now. I could only respond with confusion to his sudden change in tone. Then Brian suddenly raised his voice.
What kind of a response is that? I'm your husband, so you should address me with more respect. A wife should respect and honor her husband, don't you even know that?
I was too shocked to respond right away. What had happened? It was as if the Brian I knew had been replaced by someone else. A transformation from a prince to a tyrant. I wondered what kind of a witch had cast such a spell. Listen, I'm an elite, you know that, right? You have to become a wife worthy of me. Prepare yourself for the training I'm going to give you. From that day on, I was constantly ordered around by Brian. First, Brian demanded perfect housekeeping from me. Make sure the house is immaculate, ready for anyone to come over at any time. That's a housewife's job. Don't you dare embarrass me. My family ran a restaurant, so honestly, our house was never in a pristine state. My father was busy in the kitchen, and my mother was helping out too. There was no way we could manage perfect housekeeping. My parents did their best, tidying up and cleaning whenever they spotted a mess, but running a restaurant while raising me was overwhelming. My grandparents on my father's side lived far away, but my grandparents on my mother's side looked after me during particularly busy hours. That was how we managed to get by.
I can't do that. I mean, I have my restaurant to take care of. Don't make excuses before even trying. You don't even want to make any effort.
I managed to put the conversation to rest at the time by saying that I would try, but when I actually started, I realized that it was impossible. Look, I have the restaurant to handle, so can't we hire someone for the housework? It wasn't like I was saying I wouldn't do any housework at all. I just wanted to hire a housekeeper to make up for what I couldn't manage, but Brian didn't like the idea. Why should we waste money like that? The best thing about a housewife is that she's free labor. I was shocked by his words. Free labor, is that how Brian saw me? It became crystal clear at that moment. That little restaurant of yours, who knows when it'll go under? You're lucky you found someone like me to support you. Be grateful and serve me well. When we were dating, he had praised me for taking over the business from my parents at such a young age. That's one of the reasons why I fell for Brian. It might be a small place, but it meant a lot to me, and he had once praised my dedication to keeping it going. Just keep the restaurant as insurance. If need be, we can sell it. It's worth something even if it's small. But if it starts losing money, shut it down immediately. It's not worth keeping if it's running at a loss. That's what he said.
So that's what you've wanted all along. I'll never let go of that restaurant, no matter what.
Just do your best, but don't forget that I'm only allowing this to be your little hobby because I feel sorry for you. Remember, it's because I care about you. Brian said while laughing. From that day on, I started thinking about getting a divorce. But I still had some affection for Brian. I wanted to prove him wrong and make him apologize. I was sure he would understand someday. I worked like a horse with these mixed feelings. Indeed, it's a small restaurant, sustained mostly by regulars. Nowadays, most people opt for chain restaurants which offer the same taste wherever you go. That's why big chains thrive. But there will always be those who seek a nostalgic taste. That's why I want to keep the restaurant going. That desire never fades. While maintaining a seemingly peaceful marriage on the surface, I worked hard for the day I would prove Brian wrong. And to that, Brian half mockingly, half amusedly would say, "Wow, you're really trying hard, still keeping that restaurant going, huh? I thought it would fail soon." Well, as long as you take care of the house, you can keep going. I was already doing it without being told. Every morning, I'd wake up early to prepare breakfast for Brian, wake him up, and see him off, then rush out of the house. I'd spend a busy day at the restaurant, and then after closing, I'd shop for groceries, come back home to cook dinner, and clean. When Brian returned, I'd serve him dinner, get ready for a shower, do the laundry, prepare for the next day, and take care of anything else left to do. I was cutting back on sleep, scheduling every day tightly to manage everything without wasting a moment. If the house ever gets messy, I'll make you close down the restaurant immediately and sell it. Brian was probably waiting for that day. I could feel it. Perhaps he married me intending to have a housewife with assets who provides housekeeping services for free. Back then, I was infatuated with Brian. He knew that and thought I'd never stand up to him. That's probably why he chose me. It surprised me how much you dedicate yourself to the restaurant. I thought once we got married, you'd only have eyes for me. I feel betrayed. Brian said one day. I thought I was the one being betrayed. I had believed he understood me when he chose me. I wanted to say that, but I swallowed my words. And then things got worse. My mother has fractured a bone and is hospitalized. Sarah. Brian's parents live in the neighboring state. I don't want to say this, but like Brian's true colors, they are not the most pleasant people. Brian is our pride and joy. A graduate from a top university, working at a leading company, an elite man. You've been chosen by Brian, so you should be grateful and serve us well. Helen doesn't realize her luck. Someone married to our son, Brian, should be greeting us in a fancy cocktail dress and a bottle of decent wine. That's right. It's just as I expected. A daughter of a restaurant owner must be poorly educated. That was the first thing they said to me when we met. Not only were they rude to me, but they insulted my parents too. I was about to say something back when my anger got the better of me, but Brian intervened to settle the matter, so I decided to keep my mouth shut for the moment.
Come now, Helen is still young. It's understandable that she lacks in certain areas. Think of it as having a potential to grow.
I should have realized the true nature of this family at that point, but back then, I was convinced that Brian was protecting me and that he was on my side. After that, my in-laws continued to make snide remarks every time something happened. I can't believe Brian married a restaurant owner's daughter. Right, someone like Brian could have married a daughter of a CEO or an executive. Think about that, Helen. Be a good daughter-in-law to us. My in-laws seemed to think that only those working in big corporations like Brian were successful, and anyone in other professions, especially the service industry, were second-class citizens. But even so, Sarah's injury is unfortunate. I'd have to at least pay her a visit. But then Brian said something shocking. It's a femur fracture. She'll need hospitalization and rehabilitation for a while after surgery. Can you look after her? Wait, but aren't hospitals still enforcing visitation restrictions? I can maybe visit or bring something, but looking after her might not be allowed, right? Who said anything about the hospital? I mean, after my mother is discharged and comes to live with us. It took me a moment to understand what he meant. As I was silently pondering, Brian dropped the bombshell. Don't be dense. Once my mother is discharged, she's moving in with us, along with my father.
What?
You have a problem with that? Of course, it was a problem. Even the thought of living alone with Brian was unbearable, let alone with his parents too. I can't take care of Sarah, I said firmly. I have my restaurant to run. It's impossible. Professional care would be best for her. Why should we pay for that when you're here? Then, close down the restaurant. Sell it and use that money for the family. Brian made an outrageous demand. I won't sell the restaurant. And I won't take care of Sarah.
You're the housekeeper, so you do all the cooking, cleaning, and nursing. If you don't like it, get a divorce and get out.
Brian made it clear that I was his housekeeper. So that was the plan all along. I'm free labor, a housekeeper. On top of that, I'm also expected to look after your mother, Sarah.
Of course, we got married, and you're my wife. You're not cut out for it if you don't like it. Pack your bags and leave. I can divorce you anytime.
It must have been his final warning. Brian said it with a nasty smirk. Listen, I'm an elite from a prestigious company. You're only just getting by with that pathetic business, thanks to me. Remember that. All right, then. I whispered, and it seemed to reach Brian.
As long as you understand. Remember, do as I say.
Without responding, I turned my back on Brian and muttered quietly again. Then consider yourself fired.
What?
Brian didn't hear it clearly and asked again, but I didn't bother repeating myself. I need to get things ready, so I can't do it right now. Fine, there's still time before my mother is discharged. They say she needs at least a month in the hospital. If you're ready by then, that's fine. Brian must have thought I had agreed and went to the bedroom, satisfied. I had been preparing for this for 2 years. Everything had been for this very moment. But even so, I still had hope. That Brian would return to the man he was before we got married. I didn't want to believe that the person I loved so much, that those happy days, were a lie. That's what I thought. But all my hopes were shattered. I had to make up my mind. I was ready. Hello, it's Helen. No, it didn't work out. It can't be helped. Let's take action. I made a call to someone, ready to move forward. A month later, an article made it to the front page of the economics section of the newspaper. The story was that the food manufacturer for which Brian worked for was about to be acquired by a restaurant group in a large stock buyout.
What the hell is this?
In frustration, Brian yanked the newspaper from side to side, tearing it in half.
This is a joke. We're a leading company. And now they're selling us out to some stupid restaurant group.
Brian crumpled the torn newspaper and hurled it against the wall.
Damn it, what's gonna happen? This can't be true.
Brian turned on the TV as if waking from a nightmare, only to see the same news. It seemed the acquisition was real.
Damn it, how did it come to this?
Brian slumped down on the sofa and ruffled his hair in frustration. There's nothing we can do about what's already happened. Here, take this. What's this? Brian looked at what I offered him and his eyes widened in shock. He seemed very surprised.
What is this?
It's a divorce petition.
I can see that. What the heck do you think you're doing giving me this?
Brian crumpled the divorce papers and threw them too. That too, after the newspaper? No matter how much you crumple it, nothing will go back to how it was.
Why do you want a divorce? I demand an explanation.
Are you kidding? Have you forgotten? You're the one who mentioned it. Brian went silent, likely remembering his own words. I won't take care of Sarah or live with your parents. If you don't like it, get a divorce. Those were your words, right?
I did say that. But well, I was bluffing, thinking you wouldn't listen to me otherwise.
So it was a threat. Brian didn't respond. I married you because I loved you. I trusted you. But you deceived me and betrayed me repeatedly. That's why I've decided to get a divorce. I took another divorce petition from the file and placed it in front of Brian. I have spare copies, so feel free to crumple that too. If I run out, I can get more or download it and print it out. We live in such convenient times. Brian stared at the divorce petition placed before him again.
This is a lie, right?
He looked at me with pleading eyes. No, it's true. This is reality.
You're not that kind of woman, right? You wouldn't do something so cruel when I'm so vulnerable.
It seemed like he wasn't going to accept it so easily. Think about what you've done, and what you've tried to do to me. Which do you think is worse? I took my time to tell Brian. Do you remember what you said after we got married? That a wife should respect and honor her husband? Brian didn't respond. I respected you even before we got married. That's why I decided to marry you. But after hearing those words, my respect for you vanished. People who trample on others are also trampling on their own feelings. Brian looked down, silent. You saw me only as free labor, a housekeeper. And the restaurant I cherished, you saw as an asset to cash in. I realized that, but still, I loved you.
Helen.
Brian looked up at me with hope.
I'm sorry. I didn't realize you cared about me so much. That's why I acted harshly. Please forgive me.
Brian held my hand, tears streaming down his face.
I'll change, I promise. Give me another chance. I'll treasure you this time.
I'm sorry. I pulled my hand away from Brian's.
Why not? We loved each other, didn't we? We can still make it work.
No, it's too late. I've lost all faith in you. That's why I decided to acquire your company.
What?
Brian looked at me, bewildered. The big restaurant group that acquired your company, with 1,900 full-time employees, I'm the president of that company. Unfortunately, I'm letting you go.
No, this isn't the time for jokes. What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind?
Brian half laughed, but it was the truth. never mind that for now. Here, take this. Brian took the envelope I handed him with confusion, then screamed in disbelief as he checked the contents.
What's this?
It was evidence of Brian's affairs. There were documents from a private investigator and numerous photos.
A female employee in the secretarial department, a subordinate's wife, a recent college graduate, a woman from a business partner, a girl from a club, and who else?
The list was astonishingly long. Brian is attractive. And with his elite status, it's no surprise women flocked to him. Amazing, isn't it?
Your affairs are too many to count on both hands. I'll be seeking compensation for all of them, from you and the women involved. Hey!
What? Brian, looking at the documents and photos, turned pale and trembled. He tried to speak to me but didn't seem to know what to say.
The problem is the time and place of the affairs. A lot of them seem to happen when you were supposed to be working. I think this is a breach of trust against the company.
A lot of them occurred when he was out of the office on business during working hours, making sales rounds, on business trips, and entertaining clients. Brian was with his mistresses instead, as detailed in the documents.
You've been investigating me like this all along?
Yes, that's right.
That's not fair.
Brian threw the documents and photos at me.
You used the money I earned for this? No, not a single dollar of your money was used. Liar. You don't have that kind of money.
Brian, being an elite, had a high salary. He saw me as free housekeeping labor, but he did contribute financially to the household.
You know I'm the owner of a restaurant, right? Yeah, that near bankrupt one. Just a hobby, isn't it? Owner, huh? Ridiculous. It's true that if you look at the finances alone, the restaurant doesn't seem that prosperous. But there's more to it.
I told Brian the whole truth.
That restaurant was for gathering information. I was researching the current trends, what sells, and things like that.
That restaurant, established by my parents, was the first of many. Now, it's a major chain with locations not just in America, but abroad too. The company that acquired Brian's workplace was the parent company of that restaurant chain.
This must be a lie.
It is not a lie. The location of the original restaurant was ideal for market research. The first restaurant thrived mainly due to my father's skills. But the reason we could expand was due to understanding customer preferences.
You never talked about your family business like this before. You tricked me.
I didn't trick you. I just didn't tell you. When I started dating Brian and considering marriage, my father advised me to wait and see.
In hindsight, my father saw through your true nature. He said to tell you if you didn't change after our marriage.
Back then, I would have married Brian regardless of his opposition. That's why my father had said such a thing. And what I told Brian when we married wasn't a lie. My father was ill and struggling to continue working. So, he had my uncle take his place as the company president, and he pretty much retired. That's why it was true when I said I took over the restaurant, because my father was sick. He had undergone major surgery and difficult treatments. As an only child, I was still too young to take over the company, so I was in charge of the restaurant, partly so that I could learn new things. My business degree couldn't make up for my extreme lack of experience. I was told that if I failed to run the restaurant, I wouldn't be acknowledged as the successor. So, I worked hard to continue my father's legacy and earn his approval. My father probably warned me to keep quiet, fearing the business might be taken over or ruined by a bad marriage. But I thought Brian was different, and I wanted to prove I could be honest with him. That's why I remained silent. Well, I was disappointed.
My father even told me that if Brian wasn't the man I thought, I should resolve it by myself.
Of course, that's what I should do. There was no way I could run such a large corporation if I couldn't handle something as small as this.
So, I've lived these past 2 years thinking about how I would make you regret it if you didn't show any remorse. Though, at the same time, I hoped you'd change your ways.
I sighed, picked up my mobile phone, and made a call. The person on the other end answered right away, so I just said what I needed to and hung up. Immediately, the bell to the front entrance rang, so I unlocked it to let the visitor in.
Who's that?
Just watch. Soon the doorbell rang, and I invited the guest in.
The company president.
It was the former president of the company Brian worked for, soon to be mine. The former president bowed stiffly to me. Please proceed. The former president silently handed Brian a document.
Termination notice.
It was an official document. Brian was being fired for misconduct, including meeting women during work hours and charging personal expenses as business entertainment. In exchange for firing Brian, I promised the former president that he could continue as the company's president, and he agreed to the condition. Even minor misdeeds can accumulate into a major offense. What you did constitutes a serious breach of trust. It's only fair that you're dismissed. Brian stood in shock, but I had no intention of letting him off the hook. If you understand, would you please leave now?
Why should I? This is my house.
This place is rented, right? The landlord says you can't stay here anymore. He doesn't want to rent it to you. Brian looked completely confused. I decided to elaborate further. I bought this apartment. And you seem to have forgotten, but the lease was only until last month. So, you no longer have the right to live here. I don't plan on renewing the contract. Brian was speechless. We'll have to decide on asset division and who gets which furniture, but for now, I don't want to see your face. Could you go back to your parents' house? Sarah is about to be discharged from the hospital, isn't she? Sarah was scheduled to be discharged in a few days after a month-long stay in the hospital. Go back and prepare for Sarah's return. We'll communicate through our attorneys about what comes next. Please take him with you. I handed Brian over to the former company president. If you come back, I'll report you for trespassing. Even though we're not officially divorced yet, if the landlord says no, it's a no. Brian left the room with the former company president silently. There was still more work to be done, but I have reached the end of a chapter. After Brian went back home, I started receiving calls persistently from my in-laws, having heard about the divorce.
Helen, you're so amazing. Why didn't you tell us?
You truly are our son's wife. We are so proud of you. Getting a divorce must be a joke, right? Helen, you loved Brian so much. Can't you forgive a fling or two? That's just men being men. At first, they were arrogant, but when they realized my resolve to get a divorce was firm, they resorted to threats.
You got Brian fired. What are you going to do about that? We'll demand compensation. What you did is unthinkable for our son's wife. Hiring a detective to investigate your husband's behavior. Imagine how it would affect your reputation if it gets out.
When I confidently told them to go ahead with claiming compensation and leaking information about me, they finally shifted to begging.
Helen, I'm really sorry. It felt like you took Brian away from me, and I acted spitefully. Please understand. What are we supposed to do if you leave us? I apologize if I upset you. So, please forgive Brian. If you can't forgive him, how about just us? We were family once, after all.
Of course, I refused everything they had said to me. I've said it over and over again, but I'm divorcing Brian. If you keep pestering me, I'll report you to the police and consider taking legal action. After consulting with my attorney, we sent them a formal warning, and they finally stopped contacting me. I made sure Brian paid the compensation. And I ensured it was paid from the assets we divided. Luckily, his high salary meant he had savings. Now jobless and without savings, he's back living with his parents. He found a job in the service industry that he once looked down upon, working from early morning till late at night. Considering he had affairs with other men's wives, he's also facing compensation claims from their husbands. I hope he works hard and pays it all off, no matter how many years it takes. I talked to the women with whom he had cheated. All of them apologized, saying they weren't serious and were just in it for Brian's money and elite status. While I had anticipated this, any relationship with a married person, regardless of the reason, is a legal offense and can be subject to a lawsuit. I made sure these women understood the severity of their actions by legally requiring them to pay compensation. Hopefully, this will be a lesson, and they won't repeat the same mistake. After that, I officially took over as the company president from my uncle. I appointed my uncle as the chairman to continue receiving his help and advice. Although my father's condition has stabilized, he's not in a state to work. But seeing me take over the company, he started seemed to bring him peace, and his spirits noticeably improved. Occasionally, he still offers his thoughts and advice, which I value greatly. I hope my parents live as long as possible. Right now, that's my greatest wish. I've caused them so much worry by getting involved with such an awful man. I gave my parents a lot of trouble, but I resolved my problems all on my own. That seemed to make my father approve of me as a manager. Next time, I want to meet someone better and reassure my parents as a daughter, but I'm not sure I want to get married for a while. This company is like my child now. I want to raise it and help it grow bigger and better. As a company president, I'm just taking my first steps. But I believe a bright future lies ahead on this path. And of course, I'm still running that restaurant. This restaurant was where my parents began their business, and it was the start of my career. In a way, it's like my first child that I shall cherish for the rest of my life. I want to treasure it forever so that I never forget where I came from. Suddenly, my parents appeared and started knocking on the car window.
Dad, did someone ask you for something?
Well, what could that be? You're always so stubborn. Just go and convince your husband, James. Say the chairman should be William because it's better for the company and step down. Or else. So, they've teamed up with my in-laws to knock James off the chairman's seat. And then I noticed, in Mom's hand was something like a crowbar. She swung it high and crash, the window shattered. I was stunned for a while when I heard that a suicide note was found in James's car, who had fallen off a cliff. Then, a week after the car was found, an envelope arrived with a specific delivery date. James? I hurriedly received the envelope and opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter. And a key. Read this without our parents finding out. Of course, I knew that. But he probably wanted to write it that way. This is something I wrote in advance, in case something happened. If I'm there when you receive it, just laugh and give it back to me. But if I'm not there, please, Linda, take what's stored in this locker and flee to your Uncle Richard's place immediately. Susan, my sister-in-law who was reading it with me, and I exchanged glances. And then we immediately grabbed the essentials and ran to Richard's house, my husband's uncle. To protect ourselves and our children, and to let both our parents know what they had done. My name is Linda, 34 years old. I'd like to say I'm just an ordinary housewife, but that was only true until a week ago. Now, I'm a widow with 2 children. James took his own life. That's the most likely possibility, I was told. His car had fallen off a cliff. And a suicide note was found in the dashboard. I can't believe it, I won't believe it. Because it's true. There's no reason for James to take his own life. By himself. Rather. James and I met at our workplace. A real estate resort hotel, the place I had always wanted to work. As a child, I was captivated by a large, beautiful hotel I visited at the invitation of my parents' acquaintance. I chose a university that would teach me important things for the tourism industry, and even my part-time jobs during my student years were behind the scenes at nearby hotels. And finally, I got a job at the resort hotel I had always dreamed of. It was a place known for its strict employee training, and I almost gave up early on. The reason I was able to keep going was thanks to a colleague at that time. People quit one after another, unable to withstand it, but someone was watching over me, the one who remained. That person was James, who later became my husband. We dated for 2 years before getting married. But I was surprised by a fact I learned at that time. James was the nephew of the chairman of this real estate group. He was supposed to become a part of the group's upper echelon eventually, but at that time, he was still working as a resort hotel employee. After our marriage, James moved from the hotel to the real estate side and started showing his face at his uncle's, the chairman's, office. Originally, this group was just a local real estate business, but it grew significantly after the war. The current chairman is the second since the group was formed, and it's said that Richard's skills played a major role in its growth. During the good times, he convinced his parents, so they suffered less when the economy turned bad. Then they started developing resorts, and that too was steadily advanced. But things started getting fishy around Richard when he fell ill last year. And that was because Richard had no direct heir. That's when Richard appointed James as his successor. And that decision shortened James's life. I couldn't quite come to terms with the news from the police that James had died. In the midst of that, my in-laws kept calling.
Linda, what happened to James was something terrible.
Something terrible? Is that how these people summarize their own son's situation?
Hey, Linda, it's going to be tough on your own, right? Come and live at our house. That's right. With James gone, you're going to have financial difficulties, right?
William and Jessica, my father-in-law and mother-in-law, took turns speaking such words to me. Feeling irritated, I responded, "I can't think about the future right now." And with that, I hung up the phone. What now? I thought. After all, I had only met these in-laws twice. First time, to announce our marriage, and the second time was our wedding day. They never even showed their faces when our son and daughter were born. Yes, James had always avoided his parents, my in-laws. He had harbored distrust towards them since our marriage, saying to me,
"Those people are scum who never even try to work for themselves."
James's parents currently hold certain posts within the Smith Real Estate Group.
But that's just to keep them from doing anything.
James had explained to me. He said they were completely different from the capable Richard, and everything they did turned out to be a detriment to the group.
So they're given nominal positions just to keep them from messing up. Just going on inspections, which are basically just vacations, he said.
Didn't they take you on those trips, letting you see various places? James scoffed at the thought. Me and Susan were always left behind in our big house. James had a sister named Susan. Susan married a man with no connections to the group and lived in the city where he worked. Robert, Susan's husband and James's brother-in-law, got along strangely well with James. He would go out of his way to visit James when he was nearby for work. Susan would be like,
"I'm jealous of James,"
seeing how close they were. Yes, the two siblings got along well. And both had a strained relationship with their parents.
But I'm fine with it. Once I got married and moved away, I didn't care about them anymore.
Susan said nonchalantly. But James is involved with the group.
And that means?
Our parents know they're the failures of the group, so they hate seeing James do well.
Is that how it is? At our house, yes. But your parents are different, right? Not at all.
Yes. My relationship with my parents was not good either. No, it was fine when I was a child. As their only daughter, I thought they loved me. But their true nature emerged when I was in college. Quit college and come back home. That was the sudden message I received. It was for a marriage proposal. They wanted to make me, a 20-year-old at the most, come back home for that reason. Apparently, Thomas, the son of a well-known local figure, had taken a liking to me when he returned home.
I insist on having her as my wife.
To fulfill Thomas's spoiled wish, my parents were willing to do it for their own benefit.
We've raised you so far, so you should show filial piety towards us, right?
I felt my image of my parents shatter. They had raised me, their daughter, just for the sake of a return. Realizing this, I firmly refused to return home. Then, they stopped sending me money for education and living expenses. They thought that would make me come back. But I stubbornly refused to return. I consulted with my professor and found a way to continue my studies without being taken back by my parents. It was a struggle until I graduated. I managed to cover my educational expenses through scholarships. The problem was living expenses. I moved out of my secure one-room apartment, sold unused furniture, and moved into an older apartment. My life revolved around university, part-time jobs, and job hunting. I only went back to my room to sleep. As a result, this part-time job experience led to employment and meeting James. And my parents were oddly happy about my marriage to James.
Aren't they good parents?
Comparing them to his own, James said with a wry smile.
No. They did their research. They found out that you are the nephew of the chairman of the real estate group.
You're kidding. James couldn't believe it for a while. But when my parents visited for the births of our son Daniel and our daughter Mary, James also realized they were not so different from his own parents. After all, my parents said,
"Now that you have 2 kids, your future is secure. Yes, it'll make our lives easier too."
James's smile twisted slightly at that moment. Both James and I were sensitive to the words of parents. Especially James, who knew about my struggles during college. Were they a bit too relaxed, or did they just take it for granted? Either way, their words were clearly meant to mooch off of us and our kids in the future. After that, James started to be wary of them too. Distant in-laws, parents trying too hard to make contact. While being cautious of both, I continued raising our children. Fortunately, with James' current position and salary, we could afford a housekeeper and a sitter. We don't have trustworthy relatives, but we've managed on our own. But last year, things changed. Richard fell ill. Richard, in his 60s, who always kept fit and seemed immune to sickness, suddenly faced a health crisis. He was in good shape, with no blood pressure issues that I knew of. But an impact he suffered on his head when he was young had now formed a hematoma, pressing on his brain. Emergency surgery saved him, and he was on a good path to recovery with no lasting effects. However, this incident shook the group as Richard hadn't named a successor. Richard himself thought, "I can still keep going." That's probably why he hadn't decided yet. But illness strikes unexpectedly. Once you know that, you have to think about a successor. And here's where the problem arose, the choice of who it would be. Richard and his wife had no children. No biological or adopted child was there at that time. So, Richard, while recuperating, nominated James. It seemed a reasonable choice within the group. Most senior employees knew that James was being trained and educated within the group. But some just couldn't accept it. The in-laws.
"Wait a minute, Richard. Isn't he still too young? Aren't I the closest one to you, Richard? Why are you overlooking William for James?"
They apparently confronted Richard while he was recuperating. Richard retorted sharply,
"If I leave it to William and the others, the group will be ruined."
And he explained clearly why he chose James. But then, their focus shifted to James.
"Step down, say you're too young and want your parents to take over."
Those were their words. It was a threat, clear and simple. Initially, it was, "Please." But gradually it turned into,
"Do something about it, or else."
Their tone changed.
"This is bad."
"What do you mean?"
"They might harm me, you, and our kids if we let them be." "Really?"
I initially wondered if they would go that far.
"They would,"
James said.
"I never thought of them as my parents. And they probably don't think of us siblings as their children. No, that's not right. They only see children as tools to generate profit. I feel the same about my side."
No. James shook his head.
"Their level of scum is worse. Your parents are just hanging on for profit, but mine, they'll try to take everything. Then what should we do?"
His use of the word take startled me. We had finally found a family filled with love and trust. I didn't want anyone to be hurt.
I have an idea. I'll make sure the condo's security is tight against intruders. So Linda, please protect the kids when you're outside of the house.
I'm not sure if I can handle it alone.
I'll ask a security company through Richard. They'll discreetly guard you when you're out. Understood.
I responded. Since then, I've chosen popular places for outings with the kids. I also actively participated in gatherings with mom friends. It's harder for them to harm us when we're in a group. But still, there was a time when someone tried to kidnap one of the kids. It first happened at the park while playing with the other kids. I thought I would just be chatting with mom friends while we watched our kids play. But then, a plump middle-aged woman, who seemed to be just strolling, suddenly picked up Mary and started running. Luckily, the security guard, who was watching over us discreetly, quickly intervened. But the woman who tried to kidnap Mary ran away with surprising agility. In the end, we never found out why or who was behind it.
People, be careful, it's a scary world out there.
Everyone would just say. We agreed on a common understanding to be wary of both money motives and pranks. But I had forgotten one thing to be wary of. Hey there. I ran into my parents in the condo's parking lot. It was right after shopping with the kids, as we were getting out of the car. I quickly turned back into the car and locked it. Blatantly, my parents started banging on the car windows.
Mom, why are Grandpa and Grandma doing this? I'm scared.
I cracked the window just enough to speak through it. I really didn't want to open it, but we couldn't talk with it closed.
What do you want? Ah, you finally opened it. Listen, Linda, could you please talk to James?
What? You know, isn't it a bit off that young James is becoming the next chairman? Shouldn't it be William's turn?
A chill ran down my spine. Could it be that these people?
Dad, did someone ask you to do this?
What? I don't know what you're talking about.
Dad pretended not to know what I was talking about. And Mom said,
You're always so stubborn. Just go and convince your husband, James. Say the chairman should be William because it's better for the company and step down. Or else.
In Mom's hand was something like a crowbar. Then she swung it high and crash, the window shattered. The kids screamed. Mom reached her hand through the broken window.
Get down!
I yelled to the kids and frantically honked the horn, signaling to the security guard who must have been nearby. Thankfully, several men soon came running. Tisk! My parents clicked their tongues and quickly left the scene, escaping in a nearby car.
Are you okay?
The security guards asked us.
I'm fine, but the kids.
I'm okay.
Daniel responded loudly. But it was true that shards of glass had fallen on both of them.
I'll head back to our room now. Can you escort us to the entrance, please?
The guards agreed and escorted us. The manager was surprised at our situation and promised to thoroughly guard against outsiders. That night, I told James everything.
My own parents, of all people. Ah, they must have been convinced. Offering a good position if they become chairman or something.
It was likely. Very likely. Why did both our parents have to be such people?
This is seriously bad. I'll go to Richard and ask him to look after you and the kids for a while.
To Richard?
Yes, but we have to make sure we're not noticed. Also, I'll contact Susan. I want her to stay with you and the kids for a bit. But won't that be a burden on Susan? Considering who we're dealing with, it's necessary. They might think the same thing could happen to Susan since she's of the same bloodline. We're better off making a united front.
With that, James immediately contacted Susan.
Unbelievable. Those people. All right, James, I'll join you. What about Robert?
Robert's got work, right? Well, yeah, but okay, I'll talk to him.
Thanks. It's good to have siblings at times like this. I thought to myself. And the next day, Susan came over promptly.
I told Robert about the situation, and he said he's got something to look into and will join us later.
Really?
Robert's reliable.
Well, he is the man I chose.
We laughed together. But the day after that conversation, the call from the police came.
We've found James Smith's car at the bottom of a cliff.
I couldn't grasp the meaning of the words immediately.
What does that mean? He was brought into the hospital earlier.
I couldn't quite process the rest of the words.
Mrs. Smith, are you listening?
I heard the voice from the other end, but I couldn't move right away. Shocked, Susan took over the call. After that, it felt like I was just being dragged around by Susan everywhere. We went to the police, confirmed things, and were handed an envelope found on the dashboard.
A will.
When opened, there was a printed letter inside. The content was,
I can't bear the burden of being nominated as chairman, I'm sorry.
That's what it said.
So, has the police concluded that James took his own life? No, there's still an autopsy and other procedures, so the final conclusion will come later. We're just showing you this because it was found.
There's no way he'd do this to himself.
I was shouting loudly.
James, who always told us to be careful.
I couldn't find any more words after that. The police said,
We'll contact you when it's time to return James's body.
And sent us home. I can't clearly remember what happened for a while after that. The local news on TV was saying,
it's not yet clear whether it was an accident.
Having said that, they also said,
a suicide note was found, and there's a strong belief that he took his own life.
That was how it was reported on the news. I was so angry, I turned off the TV, and the kids looked at me anxiously.
Is Daddy coming back?
Daniel is 8, Mary just 5. Both of them had been taken out of school and kindergarten for a while. I was truly grateful Susan was there. My mind felt like it was covered with a thin film at that time, everything felt unreal. However, a week after the car was found, an envelope arrived with a specific delivery date.
Linda, take a look at this.
Susan handed it to me, who was in a daze. I glanced at the sender's name and my eyes widened. James? In a rush, I took the envelope and opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter. And a key.
Read this without our parents finding out.
Of course, I knew that. But he probably wanted to write it that way.
This is something I wrote in advance in case something happened. If I'm there when you receive it, just give it back to me. But if I'm not, please, Linda, take what's stored in this locker and run to Richard's place immediately.
Susan and I, reading it together, looked at each other. Then hurriedly, taking only the bare minimum, we took the kids and all got into Susan's car. My car had been under repair since that time. I didn't feel confident driving a rental car to Richard's in the next state. So, I relied on Susan.
Leave it to me, just wear a hat and a mask,
Susan said with a smile. And then we drove non-stop. We were anxious until we reached Richard's house in the next state. I assumed security guards were nearby. But after what happened to James, I was worried something might happen to the car. While on the road, I contacted Richard's house.
We're on our way.
We parked inside the property and hurried towards the main house. Richard and his wife Nancy were already there to greet us.
We're glad you're here, Linda, Susan. James asked us to guard you guys, and said he'd send you guys here eventually. But to think it would come to this. Thank you for having us. I'm sorry. This was the only place we could turn to.
I apologized deeply. The kids were looking around the grand entrance in amazement.
Don't worry. I didn't expect it to come to this. I underestimated them. I never thought they'd actually target James himself, those bastards.
Richard clenched his fist in frustration. We were led into a large, cozy living room. The room had a calm and warm atmosphere. Nancy instructed the housekeeper, then brought the kids to a corner of the room with some snacks.
Thank you so much. It's all right. You want to keep the kids in sight right now, don't you?
Yes, I didn't want to take my eyes off of them even for a moment. But the conversation we were about to have was not something I wanted the children to hear directly.
William has always been rotten, but we lacked a decisive move to exclude him from the group. Letting him float around led to this mess.
It's not your fault, Richard. My parents were involved in this too. James and I both had terrible parents. If only we had adopted James into our family earlier.
Nancy muttered. Then Richard looked up.
That's right, that's a good idea. Call the lawyer.
Richard, I don't want those kids to end up like James.
Richard said this and made me a proposal. Eventually, James's body, after the autopsy, was brought to Richard's house for a private funeral and a memorial service within the group. I attended with the kids, as the representative of the bereaved family. Behind us, my parents sat shamelessly as James's in-laws. Colleagues from the company, all puzzled and saddened by James's sudden loss, were in attendance.
He was truly an excellent employee. We were looking forward to his future in the group. Thank you. James would be honored to hear that.
I mechanically repeated these greetings. Friends who joined the company at the same time as James were.
How could this happen?
Crying over the sudden loss. Everyone who had personal ties with James was genuinely good. But their parents. After the memorial service, Richard gathered the family, my parents, and the executives at his house. The large garden and halls of Richard's house were crowded with people. Then, someone came running in.
Robert!
He must have just arrived. Robert came running in, clutching a bag.
Sorry I'm late, Susan, Linda. There were a lot of complications on my end. But it's good that the memorial service and the meeting were scheduled for today. It worked out.
Robert had a sly smile.
I'll return this to you.
Robert took out a set of documents and a USB drive from his bag.
Is it all settled?
It was from the locker indicated by the key we received earlier. After leaving in Susan's car, we met up with Robert, who made copies of the documents and the drive.
You've given the copies to our lawyer, right?
Yes.
That's good. We really needed the originals here.
I nodded vigorously. At the meeting that started, Richard spoke in front of everyone about the incident, expressing his regrets over losing James, the successor. Then, when he paused, Richard continued.
It's a real shame. And I think there's one thing I was wrong about.
Richard called me and my two kids forward. The kids, understandably, looked frightened and almost tearful amidst the row of adults. I told them,
It's okay,
and supported them from behind. Here, I want to appoint the next successors. My new children, Daniel and Mary. They are James's children, but I have adopted them.
The children?
The crowd murmured. Many might be surprised. But I believe this tragedy occurred because I left James as just a nephew. Right? At Richard's words, all eyes turned to my in-laws. Richard, what are you saying?
Should I say it here?
Yes, go ahead.
James took his own life, right? A suicide note was found. Probably couldn't handle the expectations.
Really? You still have more to say.
Yes.
And these children as Richard's adoptees? Putting unnecessary pressure on them again? Well, they are William's grandchildren, so maybe they won't feel that much pressure.
Ugh.
William's face twisted.
Actually, James didn't take his own life.
Richard declared firmly. The crowd stirred.
What are you saying?
The note was found in the dashboard.
No media outlet reported that it was found in the dashboard.
That's when Robert spoke up.
May I?
He asked Richard for permission to speak.
Please, go ahead.
Meanwhile, William was visibly struggling.
But if it was found in the car, then…
That's just it. We haven't leaked anything to the media. Or perhaps, William, you weren't really interested in my affairs. Saying this, Robert pulled out a police badge from his suit pocket. Yes, Robert was a detective in the state police where we lived.
Ugh.
William choked on his words. Did he really not realize? I was genuinely astonished. Indeed, Susan had said, "We haven't been in touch since he got the job." So I have heard about it before. Even when they got married, they only reported so. But shouldn't one at least be aware of the other's profession? That's just the kind of person he is. Susan's whisper was quietly heard. I could only provide crucial evidence for the investigation, being an insider. Then Robert explained. The police had been thoroughly investigating the car retrieved from the cliff since the beginning. They soon realized that the brakes had been tampered with, which happened to be on the day James sent a letter through a scheduled delivery. That day, James first went to place something in a locker at the station. Then, he went to a post office inside the station to send a letter to Linda. It took him some time. It was then that someone tampered with the brake fluid system. But that alone wasn't enough to cause immediate trouble. After that, James drove towards Richard's house. But on the way to here, there are several winding roads, right? Whispers began among the people around. Indeed. Many voices agreed. That's where a road rage incident happened, intentionally. And this road isn't always wide. Indeed, a local quirk is that despite being a frequently used road, it's surprisingly narrow in places. In such a situation, forced to precisely apply the brakes due to a road rage, I'm sure James soon realized the brakes were failing, but it was too late. So, that's what happened? Richard asked gravely. His words were vague, but the meaning was clear to all. Yes. And the police have identified the road rage driver from James's dashcam and have already apprehended him. Robert said, smiling wryly at my in-laws.
But what does that have to do with us? The road rage participant was just a hired hand. The direct employer is still unknown. However, William, you and your wife are facing separate charges. Separate charges? Yes. For the embezzlement you've been committing for years. James had been secretly investigating this matter. This is the evidence.
Suddenly, multiple projectors operated from somewhere lit up every wall with various documents.
We will now arrest you for this embezzlement.
Then, the back door opened, and police officers entered. And one more thing. Robert glanced at me, then turned to another direction.
You there. What, us?
My parents hesitated.
You're being arrested for damaging Linda's car. But that's just a family matter.
Mom protested. I turned to her, asking sharply.
A parent who breaks a car window with a bar? Indifferent to glass falling on their grandchildren's heads?
I glared with all my might and said,
You're not parents.
My parents slumped back in their seats. Afterward, my in-laws, arrested for embezzlement, confessed to planning James's death during questioning, adding to their charges. My parents were also charged with aiding in their plan, in addition to property damage. The case was first leaked to local media, then reported by regional newspapers and local news. But it didn't end there. Given the sensational nature of the crime and the involvement of biological parents, it became fodder for national news and tabloid TV. And in this day and age, that was not enough. This was the digital age, they were branded indelibly. Even if they were released, what could they possibly do? But that's not my concern anymore. Since then, we've been living at Richard's house. His wife adores our 2 new children. Nancy, who always wanted but couldn't have children, is perhaps overindulging them a bit. But for now, that's okay. The kids, having just lost their dad, had to switch schools. I feel guilty for involving them in adult conflicts. But I believe this is the safest option. As for Richard,
I must stay healthy at least until the kids are grown. He's diligently working on his fitness. Everyone, tea is ready. I spend my days in this house taking care of the kids and keeping these two company. I'm not sure how much I can contribute to them, but for the kids' sake, I'll keep doing my best.
Funeral directors are just creepy. They're haunted or something. While this is a clear case of job discrimination, the person doesn't question their own thoughts. If you're going to think like that, it's not okay if it causes trouble for others. People with closed minds inconvenience others. But for those with open hearts, it's tough to pry open the closed ones. My name is Yazoo. I have a younger brother named Leland, who's 3 years younger than me. We got along well as siblings. I adored Leland, and he relied on me. When we were little, he would always stick close to me. As we grew up, it's natural that we develop our own egos. I wasn't particularly stubborn, but Leland was a bit different. He was sensitive to things that benefited him and would go to great lengths to seize those advantages, sometimes without restraint. There was this silly incident from our childhood, something about snacks. Leland made a fuss about the size of the pancakes our mom made for our 3 p.m. snack. He claimed his pancake was smaller than mine. While his pancake did seem a bit smaller, I chose to ignore his petty complaint. Mom had gone upstairs after serving the snack and wasn't around. Leland accused me of being unfair and stingy, but I continued to ignore him. Just as I was about to start eating, Leland did something shocking. He grabbed my plate and threw its contents into the trash. Then he took a bite of his own pancake and proudly declared that he had won because he got to eat while I didn't. I was more surprised than angry. I started to worry and even fear for Leland, wondering if he would go to any lengths to assert himself. This was a typical sibling fight, but it hinted at a troubling aspect of Leland's personality. As he grew older, he became openly competitive with me. I wondered what he hoped to gain by competing with someone 3 years older and of a different gender, but Leland wasn't satisfied unless he was on top. He wouldn't be content until he had asserted himself over me, the closest person to him. I was more concerned about how he was treating people outside our family and whether he was causing them trouble. I have a childhood friend named Marshall. We have known each other since kindergarten and are the same age. Leland got along well with Marshall and even said, "I wish I had an older brother like Marshall instead of a sister like you," which I found incredibly rude. When I was in 8th grade and Leland was in 5th, Marshall's sister was in 6th grade. At the same elementary school as Leland, Marshall would pass on news about Leland to me. Leland was always trying to show off how great he was, but his classmates found him off-putting and he was isolated. Yet Leland didn't realize this, thinking instead that people were just too intimidated to approach him. Marshall's sister also said that Leland's personality was dangerous. As his sister, I wanted to do something, but the days passed without me knowing what to do. I felt helpless and my heart was heavy. The year I went to college, our paternal grandfather passed away when Leland was in 9th grade. Though he had lived a full life, the loss of our kind grandfather who had always been so fond of us plunged both me and Leland into deep sorrow. Thanks to our grandfather's good character, the funeral was well attended and grand. I was sitting with my family, lost in memories of my grandfather, when I noticed people bustling around the funeral hall. At first, I just watched them casually, but as the ceremony progressed, I began to understand their roles. I was impressed by their attention to the attendees and their efforts to ensure the ceremony went smoothly. These were the funeral directors and staff. The man who seemed to be the leader looked young but was quick to assess situations and give precise instructions to his team. All the while, he maintained a warm smile and showed genuine care for the attendees. I found their dedication to comforting grieving families and ensuring that individual attendees had no issues to be truly admirable. Near the end of the ceremony, I shared these thoughts with Leland. He scoffed. "Well, it's their job, isn't it? Besides, I can respect a job that profits off people's deaths." Leland dismissed the topic and turned away, clearly not wanting to discuss it further. I knew Leland and I were different, but his discriminatory mindset worried me. My college life was going smoothly. I was studying business management, focusing on how to run a business efficiently and effectively. After witnessing the dedication of the funeral directors at my grandfather's funeral, I added social contribution to my research themes. Coincidentally, my childhood friend Marshall was in the same department. Marshall had always been interested in how different management styles could yield different results and wanted to explore that further. When job hunting, both Marshall and I ended up aiming for the same management consulting firm. We both made it through the tough interviews and received job offers. When I joked that we were stuck together again, Marshall laughed and said, "Yeah, we really are inseparable, aren't we?" I was shocked, wondering if someone had read my mind, but I was also wondering how we were actually connected. After joining the company, Marshall and I were assigned to different teams. My team focused on consulting for the service industry, which was diverse and had a wide range of issues. Determining the most effective solutions was challenging but rewarding. 3 years in, I had learned a lot, including from my mistakes, which became valuable experiences. I have had many bitter experiences, such as when a well-intentioned method was not as effective as expected, or when I misunderstood the client's wishes due to lack of communication. But each failure has become my asset, I said. Marshall had also grown, becoming a promising youth in his team. When I complimented him, he modestly said, "That's just flattery. I have a lot more to learn." Then I was assigned a new client, a funeral home. The client's president was a man named Ezekiel, 8 years my senior. His father had stepped down as chairman, and Ezekiel had taken over with a desire to implement new strategies. He was young but full of passion. Ezekiel had joined the family business after college and had gained a lot of experience. Ezekiel spoke passionately about wanting to improve the image of the funeral business, a field often seen as somber but socially essential. I sympathized with his ideas and wanted to help him. I felt a strong connection to his vision, especially since I had been impressed by the funeral directors at my grandfather's service. When I shared this, Ezekiel checked his notebook after asking for the date and name of my grandfather. "Oh, I was the leader for that funeral. I'm glad to hear you felt that way," he said. It turned out that my grandfather's funeral was his first time leading. This coincidence fueled my desire to make the project a success. I began by identifying challenges in the funeral industry, proposing solutions and backing them up with data. Ezekiel listened intently, asking sharp questions as we slowly shaped the strategy he envisioned. Step by step, he formed a policy that would help him realize what he wanted. A few months later, we had a rough outline of the final plan. Ezekiel invited me to dinner as a thank you for the work so far. I initially declined, saying we still had a long way to go, but his insistence made me reconsider. To cut to the chase, that dinner changed my life. "I like you and want to date you with the intention of getting married," he said, looking serious after a casual conversation. He was drawn to my unbiased approach to the funeral business and my dedication to its growth. "Working with you, I know we can grow the business and, most importantly, make each other happy." I had always admired his straightforward and dedicated approach to work, and these words, which could be considered a proposal, were so like him. Before I knew it, I had accepted his offer, following my heart. I completed the project he had assigned to me and established a new business vision. Upon hearing this, he asked me to help shape his new venture, and so I decided to leave my job and get married. I had been consulting Marshall about all this, and even he was surprised by my decision to marry and quit my job. "Looks like Yazoo beat me to the punch on marriage," he said, but he also wished me well and encouraged me to work hard in my future endeavors. On the other hand, Leland had a different reaction. "Marrying a funeral director and becoming one yourself? That's a job for lowlifes." Leland seemed to have a strong bias against the funeral industry. After graduating college, Leland had used his accounting skills to land a job at a well-known local hospital, even though it was privately owned. He believed his job was about saving lives, while the funeral business was for the dead and therefore less valuable. He was quite pleased with himself for this. I didn't care about Leland's cute perspective and started my new life with Ezekiel. Diving into our new business venture, I kept in touch with my old office for useful information and also stayed in contact with Marshall. Recently, Marshall had been assigned to strengthen the management foundation of the hospital where Leland worked. The hospital's director and board chairman had naturally been the one to make the request, and Leland was the point of contact for negotiation. So I got to hear about Leland's work performance from Marshall. According to Marshall, Leland didn't have a great reputation among vendors. While he treated people he knew from the past decently, he seemed to make unreasonable demands on others. I started to worry about Leland. He always put himself first, and I wondered if he could be considerate of others. But I had my own life with Ezekiel and a new business to nurture, so I was swamped. Then news came from my mother that Leland was getting married. The bride-to-be was the daughter of the director of the hospital where he worked. They had met while she was working in the hospital's administration. What surprised me more was that Leland was going to be adopted into her family. I couldn't understand why he would choose to be the groom who moves into the bride's family. There were no other sons in our family. I had assumed he would bring a bride into our family and continue the family line. Not that we had a business to pass on, but I thought the old-fashioned idea of family continuation was outdated. However, Leland had a different idea. By marrying into her family, I'll be the future board chairman. We'll hire a director, but I'll hold the real power. I'll be number one. That's what Leland told our parents. Since our parents didn't care about continuing the family line, they agreed to let Leland marry into his bride's family. The meeting between the two families took place at a Chinese restaurant in a hotel around a round table. His fiancée Magnolia and her father, the hospital director, seemed very pleased to have found a successor. Ezekiel couldn't attend the meeting due to work. But when I conveyed that both of us wished them well, I couldn't help but notice Magnolia's reaction. She didn't seem pleased when I offered my congratulation, even averting her eyes and letting out something like a sigh. I wondered if I had done something wrong, but I couldn't think of anything. We had just met today. As the meeting was wrapping up, Leland and Magnolia said they wanted to talk and led me to a tea room in the hotel. What's going on? I asked them.
To cut to the chase, we don't want you at our wedding. Can you find some excuse not to come?
Magnolia said. I was stunned and shocked by this unexpected request. Who tells their future sister-in-law not to come to their wedding? I took a deep breath and asked for an explanation.
Funeral directors are so depressing. I can't believe my sister-in-law would be in such a job. It's embarrassing and would ruin our wedding, she said.
I was shocked to realize that job discrimination was at the root of this. The funeral industry, or any job for that matter, shouldn't be subject to discrimination. Do you feel the same way, Leland? We are in a higher class because we're involved in the noble work of saving lives. We can't associate with someone in a lower class like you, he said.
You are irrelevant to us. Please disappear from our lives. We won't even tell you where we are moving to. Don't even think about finding out,
Magnolia added. I was fed up with their insults. Fine. We are irrelevant to each other, so be it, I declared, standing up and leaving. On my way home, I couldn't stop the tears as I thought about the hurtful words they had said. When I got home, my husband had already returned. He listened to my story and got angrier than I had ever seen him. He couldn't tolerate the excessive prejudice against the funeral industry and the terrible things they had said. I knew that Leland was prejudiced against the funeral industry, but I was hoping to clear up the misunderstanding and start anew as a family, including myself. But when I realized that it was just a pipe dream, I became even more angry. It was lit. We decided not to attend Leland's wedding and informed both sets of parents. Both our parents and Magnolia's were shocked and tried to reason with their children, but it was in vain. We were firm in our decision not to attend the wedding, so our parents finally gave in and went ahead with the ceremony. We had no idea how the wedding went since we didn't attend, but later my dad told me it was awkward because the bride's own sister and her husband weren't there. The excuse Leland and his group gave for our absence didn't make sense to anyone. They didn't seem to care and just enjoyed themselves. I decided to focus all my energy on establishing a new business. The concept was simple: symbiosis. The funeral industry is more diverse than you would think. It's not just the funeral homes. There are also transportation services for the deceased and attendees, catering for the post-funeral meal, and even companies that deal with gravestones. Each of these businesses is small and lacks power. So, the idea was to create a community to connect them all, streamlining operations and increasing profitability. To make this happen, we needed a lot of support and collaboration. My father-in-law, who's been in this industry for years and is well respected, took the lead in explaining the concept and persuading others to join. I also did my part by presenting data-backed documents to call for cooperation. Slowly but surely, our hard work started to pay off and the new business venture was born. There were many concerns about how jobs would be allocated and profits shared, but we set clear rules that everyone could agree on. The funeral industry is essential. People are always going to pass away and their families will need help during those tough times. The demand will never disappear, and if the supply side is well organized, business opportunities will only grow. Once we got on track, our business expanded rapidly. Now, the number of companies in our network has nearly tripled. Some are in industries you wouldn't immediately think are related, but they have been well received by our clients. I have been the CEO since the business took off. It's a huge responsibility knowing the future of so many people depends on this, but thankfully, things are going well. Our annual revenue has surpassed $1 million, a testament to our ability to satisfy a large number of clients. Then, a local newspaper that focuses on our area approached us for an interview. I accepted, seeing it as an opportunity to express my gratitude to the community and everyone who supported us. The response after the article was published was overwhelming. We were hailed as a game changer in the funeral industry. I was flooded with messages, almost all of them congratulatory, filling me with gratitude. That's when I heard from Magnolia, someone I hadn't been in touch with for years. I wondered why she was reaching out, and then she said, "Looks like you're making good money now. Why didn't you tell me? My hospital needs to implement a new medical system and we could use some financial help." I was stunned. She had obviously found out about my success and the business crossing the $1 million mark from the newspaper article or something, and now she was asking for money? Why are you even talking to us about your hospital's financial issues? We have nothing to do with it. No, thank you. After firmly rejecting the request, I got an earful of nonsense like, "You should be honored to help a prestigious hospital, and you're so stingy even though you're family." I told them not to call again and blocked their number. Just as I was reflecting on whether I had been too harsh, I got a call from Leland. "How could you not help Magnolia? You're making good money. You can afford to help. Stop being so tight-fisted." This couple is so selfish. They are perfect for each other. I told Leland the same thing I told Magnolia. "I don't know you people," and blocked his number too. A few days later, Leland somehow got through to my work phone. I assumed it's because I only blocked him on my personal phone. "Sis, all the funeral service providers are pulling out of our hospital. We can't operate like this. You have to do something." I could hear the desperation in Leland's voice. I thought it was about money again. But it seemed the hospital was in a real bind. Hospitals exist to save lives. But unfortunately, some patients do pass away. That's when we rely on funeral services for body transport and funeral arrangements. Recently, all such providers have been pulling out of Leland's hospital and no replacements are in sight. This is causing a real problem. Bodies are literally left hanging. The hospital's reputation is plummeting and complaints from families are mounting. I had heard about this from my colleagues and had even been consulted. Leland, who was responsible for contracts with service providers, had been making unreasonable demands, even asking for kickbacks. Leland was making outrageous demands, even asking for kickbacks, while threatening to terminate contracts. Fed up with his behavior, the vendors collectively decided to pull out of their deals with the hospital. Not just funeral services, but nearly all vendors withdrew, leaving the hospital in a dire state. Even when told that his selfish behavior was the root cause, Leland refused to listen, insisting he was in the right because he was the smartest. I sighed at Leland's attitude and said, "You won't get anywhere unless you realize this is all your fault. But hey, it's none of my business," before hanging up and blocking his number. The hospital's financial situation worsened. Then Marshall showed up. "Leland's hospital is in trouble because of what he's doing. I can't turn a blind eye. He's Yozo's brother, a guy I know well, and he needs to take responsibility." Marshall said. According to Marshall, while auditing the hospital's finances, he noticed some suspicious money flaws. It took time to investigate due to security measures, but it turned out Leland was misusing hospital funds. His wife Magnolia was even using a password she got from her father to move money freely. Taking kickbacks from vendors was bad enough, but embezzlement too? It made my head spin. Marshall said, "This antisocial behavior couldn't be tolerated and asked for my consent to report it." Though saddened, I agreed, thinking that otherwise I thought that if things continued like this, Leland would fall to the depths of hell. Public authorities investigated the hospital and Leland's wrongdoing was quickly revealed. Leland called the night before he was arrested. "Help me, sis. If I repay the money, my sentence will be lighter. Loan me the money."
Don't hold a grudge for what happened before, just help me.
His words showed no remorse, so I said, "There's nothing I can do. After all, I'm not involved. If I were to say one thing, it would be to reflect more sincerely." I hung up feeling lonely. Leland and Magnolia were arrested for embezzlement and likely won't avoid jail time. Even if they repay the stolen money, they can't afford it. The hospital's chairman, Magnolia's father, fired and disowned them both. He deeply apologized to the vendors and asked to resume their business. Thanks to my mediation, the funeral services resumed their business with the hospital. After all, it is the main hospital around here and is an essential place for the residents. Other industries are also starting to re-engage watching our moves. Leland and Magnolia thought they were above everyone else, hurting others in the process. Now they're paying the price. It hurts to think that maybe I could have done something for them as a sister. I love my current job. It's a job that's needed, something that absolutely can go away. I want to continue to grow with my colleagues and become a force that brings peace to the world.
Grandma is a thief, you know? The comment from my daughter caught both my mother-in-law and me off guard. But with those words, everything suddenly made sense. "Abigail, I'm sorry, but I have to go on a business trip." "It's okay. Do your best." "Bye, Dad." "Take care of your mom for me, okay?" With that, my husband Mason left for an overseas business trip. He won't be back for another 6 months. My name is Abigail. I'm 36 and work part-time at a supermarket. Mason was my senior by 2 years in college. We were in the same club, and we started dating when he graduated. We dated for about 3 years before getting married. Before and after marriage, Mason has always been kind, and we've had no issues. And we have one daughter. Her name was Mia, and she was a kind girl, just like my husband from 5th grade. Mason may be gone, but I'm not lonely thanks to Mia. However, his absence started to create a rift in our daily lives. For the past 2 months, we've been living with my mother-in-law, Isabella. My father-in-law has passed away, and Mason was worried about Isabella living alone, so we started living together. Isabella is a good person, just like Mason. But things changed as soon as Mason left. Has Mason left already? Yes, about 30 minutes ago. He didn't even say goodbye to me. When Mason left, Isabella was still asleep in her bedroom. Mason didn't want to wake her, but it seemed to have the opposite effect. I tried to smooth things over. Mason was worried about you, Isabella. He wanted you to get some rest. Isabella just said, and disappeared into the living room. Then I heard footsteps approaching. It was Mia.
Mom, can I go out and play?
Did you finish your homework for today? Mia is preparing for the entrance exam to a private middle school. She's a good student and aims to attend a private school encouraged by her teachers.
I finished it a long time ago.
Well, in that case, just as I was about to give Mia permission to go out, Isabella interrupted. Mia, have you finished your chores? What about cleaning the bathroom and the toilet?
But Ava is already waiting for me at the park.
I don't care. Finish your chores first. Mia's smile vanished. Ever since we moved in with Isabella, I've been feeling a bit uneasy. I didn't notice it much when Mason was around, but now it's clear. Isabella has been oddly cold to Mia. I don't know why. There's no sign of the typical indulgence a grandmother would show to her granddaughter. Isabella, let me handle this. She's always studying, so she needs a break once in a while. I was trying to help my daughter while also calming down Isabella, but she scolded me, saying, "Why are you spoiling her so much?" But I couldn't back down when it came to my daughter.
What about you, Isabella? Who's always just sleeping and watching TV?
Isabella's expression changed. What? I'm the one who prepares meals, right? I do the shopping, the cleaning, and even take out the trash. And you're telling Mia not to go out and play? I couldn't help but respond to Isabella in a cold tone. I admit, I might have gone too far. But seeing my daughter's downcast face after Isabella told her not to go out, I couldn't stay silent as a mother. You're getting bold, aren't you? Planning to defy me just because Mason isn't here? No, that's not it. I'm just... Be quiet. Who do you think is letting you live in this house? Isabella was completely triggered, arguing against everything I said. And thinking she's the one letting us live here made me feel like she's disregarding my husband's feelings. This takes me back to about 1.5 years ago when my husband, Mia, and I were living happily together. At one point, my husband consulted me. "Hey, Abigail, I'm worried about my mom living alone for so long. Would you consider living in her house, the 4 of us?" My husband asked hesitantly, but I had no reason to hesitate. When my dad hurt his back, my husband supported us without a second thought. So I gladly accepted his proposal. Until my husband went on a business trip, time had been passing peacefully. Isabella and I were sharing household chores and living amicably. But look at the situation now. The reason we are living here is... I started to say what I wanted, but stopped. It would probably be a waste of time, as she would just argue back. Mia, can you do what Grandma told you to do when you get back? My daughter's face brightened up when I asked.
Sure.
Then go ahead. I patted my daughter's shoulder and sent her off. Hey, wait a minute! Isabella yelled from behind, but I stepped in between so she couldn't see my daughter. A few seconds later, the front door opened and my daughter left. What do you think you're doing? Isabella, why are you so cold to my daughter the moment Mason is gone? I threw the question that had been bothering me. Isabella seemed taken aback by the sudden question. I wonder if she's aware. That's not true. Isabella denied it, but she wouldn't look me in the eye. She seemed eager to end the conversation. Fine, whatever. I'm going shopping. When I said that, Isabella seemed relieved that the conversation was over and went back to her bedroom. I returned to the living room to check what's in the fridge. Then my phone rang. It was my husband. Hello? Hey, Abigail. Just got to the airport. Glad I could hear your voice before boarding. How are you? Is it tough with just the 3 of you? My husband always puts me first, and is considerate. So it was hard to tell him about Isabella, but I decided to tell him everything. So that's why I've been wondering why Isabella is so cold to Mia, I told my husband. After a brief pause, he slowly answered my question. What he said was quite surprising to me. My mom doesn't like women who are better than her. What? Even when watching TV, she avoids shows featuring actresses. When I asked her why, she said she's annoyed seeing younger women doing well. That's quite a reason. I don't know the details, but my dad once told me that she had aspirations for Broadway. Maybe she has some weird sense of competition. This gave me some insight into why she's been cold to our daughter. Mia is a bit different from her classmates because she's taking entrance exams for a private middle school, which gives her an elite-like impression. Isabella probably sees in Mia the person she wished she could have been, and it frustrates her. Indeed, Mia has a lot of shining potential. Isabella seems to have a temperament that admires elites in all fields. While we were talking, Isabella approached me. Abigail, who are you talking to? I answered honestly to Isabella's suspicious inquiry. It's Mason. What? Are you talking bad about me? I quickly switched to speakerphone. My husband, perhaps catching my cue, began speaking to Isabella. Mom, why are you being cold to them the moment I'm gone? My husband quickly took my side and questioned Isabella. Isabella was startled by my husband's voice suddenly booming from the phone. Mason, I didn't mean to. I know you don't mean any harm, but they're my precious wife and daughter. Take good care of them. Of course, you're important too. Isabella was left speechless by my husband's admonition. She said, Fine, and left. I continued talking to my husband for a while before ending the call. After finishing shopping, I prepared dinner as Mia returned home. But that day, Isabella never left her bedroom. In the middle of the night, I woke up to go to the bathroom. I heard some noise coming from the kitchen. The sound of the gas stove echoed in the hallway. Isabella, what are you doing at this hour? It was Isabella. She was heating up some ready-made food. What's the big idea? Ignoring her question, I continued. Why are you heating up ready-made food? There's curry I made today. Isabella hadn't touched the food I made. Instead, she was heating up a pouch from a ready-made box. There were microwavable rice packets in the microwave. Of course, I cook rice in a rice cooker. I don't want to eat food from someone who only takes Mia's side. That one sentence created a rift between us. Isabella started cooking her own meals, and the emotional distance between us grew instantly. Time passed, and it was the winter of the 5th month since my husband went on his business trip. Mia took the entrance exams for her private middle school. She not only passed, but also topped the entrance exam scores. Mia, that's amazing! Let's eat something special to celebrate today. Something special? Mia's eyes sparkled. When I asked her what she'd like, she said without hesitation. Steak, and make it a really good one, she said. I accepted her request with a smile and decided to buy steak for dinner the next day. On my way home from work, I ordered a premium steak at a nearby steakhouse. Your total is $85. That's odd. I thought I had a $100 bill in here. But I'm $10 short. Can I run to the bank real quick? I felt embarrassed. My wallet was lighter than I'd thought. That was when the restaurant owner stepped in. Is this for your daughter's celebration? Can't let my reputation as a man go down over $10. Consider this as a gift for your daughter. Your total is now $75. Amazingly, the owner not only gave me a $10 discount, but also threw in some free fries. I thanked him deeply and left the restaurant. Since I had plans to dine with my daughter, I left work early, and it was still only 2 p.m. I placed the steak in a cool spot and decided to go buy a gift to celebrate Mia's success. Isabella, I'm going to the department store near the station. Since we're celebrating Mia today, please try to be cheerful. Fine. I'll be back around 7 p.m. This was the first time I'd heard Isabella mention going out. But this meant I could enjoy some quality time with my daughter. She was out playing with friends and would be back later. When I arrived at the department store, my husband called. Hello? Hey, Abigail. How are you? I'm fine. What's up? Since you're celebrating Mia's exam success today, could you secretly connect me via video call? I want to be there in spirit. What? We don't have a monitor for that. My husband is a loving father who adores our daughter as much as he cares for me, his wife. When we found out that he was going on a business trip, my husband was the most saddened. Your phone camera will do. Use a conference app and film it in real time. Just make sure Mia doesn't notice. Okay, but it'll be embarrassing for me. I took the day off work just for this. So please? My husband's innocent voice made me think he was somehow cool. A father who has even applied for paid leave and is planning to participate online in celebrating his daughter's entrance exam. All right, I agreed, smiling. For the gift, I decided to buy a stationery set. Shopping while imagining my daughter's happy face was exhilarating. Your total is $40. That's strange. I thought I had $50. Did I drop it at home? I had intended to put $150 from the money at home into my wallet, but only a $100 bill was in there. Perhaps I made a mistake, or dropped it at home. I reluctantly paid the $100 bill and left the department store. When I got home, I set up my phone as promised with my husband and launched the app. 10 minutes later, my daughter came home. Mia, dinner will be ready soon. Steak? Yes, your favorite steak, Mia happily replied. Yay! I glanced at my phone and saw my husband's face on the small screen, smiling happily. They're so alike. I couldn't help but chuckle. I started preparing dinner. I bring the wrapped steak to the center of the table. Both my daughter and my husband, who's watching through the screen, look excited. But something feels off to me. Is it lighter than before? The steakhouse owner had given me the steak in an insulated bag. The bag itself had some weight, but it's definitely lighter than when I first received it. I hesitantly reached for the insulated bag. My daughter peeks in curiously. And when I open it, huh? The box is empty. There were some traces of sauce. What's going on here? My daughter looks at me with a puzzled face. Then she starts to look distressed and asks, Mom, where's my steak? Just seeing her face makes my heart sink. Right then, Isabella walks in. I'm back. Ugh. Everyone just talks about themselves. It's exhausting. Isabella enters the room complaining. She glances at our situation and briefly smiles. I immediately confront her. Isabella, there was a steak here just a moment ago. Do you know anything about it? Without showing any guilt, Isabella casually replies, Oh, that? I had it at a luncheon with my friends. Time seems to stop for a moment. What is she talking about? I unconsciously asked her to clarify. A luncheon with friends? Yes, I had lunch with some local friends. We each brought a dish. I saw the steak and thought it'd be perfect. I transferred it to a lunchbox. Here's the lunchbox. I'll wash it, so stop glaring at me. I don't even know where to begin with her explanation. There's so much I want to ask. But before I can say anything, my daughter speaks up. Grandma, you're a thief. I quickly turn to look at my daughter. Isabella looked shocked. What did you just say, Mia? I said, you're a thief, Grandma. What is that? Isabella is 72 years old, and my daughter is just 12. Despite the 60-year age gap, Isabella is visibly shaken by my daughter's words. Because this was my steak. Mom bought it for me to celebrate. Taking it without asking is stealing. You're a thief, Grandma. Mia, if you ask me. Isabella loses her temper. But my daughter is right. Isabella is just angry because her pride is hurt. Also, Grandma, you've been taking money from my mom's wallet, haven't you? What? What? Both Isabella and I are shocked. I asked my daughter to explain. I've seen you a few times, Grandma, sneaking into Mom's bag. Your eyes looked so creepy that I couldn't say anything. I meant to tell Mom, but I forgot because I was busy with my studies. I'm sorry. My daughter apologizes, even though she's the one who caught the thief. It's okay, Mia. You're not at fault. Everything starts to make sense. Isabella must have been stealing from me today as well. Isabella, what's going on? Do you have any proof? Mia, are you trying to frame me? I won't let you get away with it just because you're a child. Isabella goes on the offensive, and my daughter looks scared. Of course, I defend her. We may not have concrete proof right now, so how about we request a fingerprint analysis? My wallet is new. There shouldn't be any fingerprints inside it other than mine. If we find yours, you're guilty. Is that okay? I don't want to do that. Isabella's tone drops, and she speaks without confidence. Why not? It would also prove your innocence. I don't need to prove anything. Fine, I took some money, so what? Isabella seems to give up hiding and snaps back at us. My daughter mutters. See, told you she's a thief. Isabella is about to get angry again, but the next voice we hear is my husband's, coming from the phone. You've really disappointed me, Mom. I never thought you'd be this kind of person. Isabella and my daughter are shocked by my husband's sudden voice. Dad? Mason, why? I had Abigail set up a monitor. I've seen everything from the beginning. What a celebration party this has turned out to be. All thanks to you, Mom. My husband's tone is colder than I've ever heard it. Isabella looks like she's about to collapse. Why? Why is Mason? Isabella tries to play the victim, but my husband continues mercilessly. I moved here with Abigail and Mia because I was worried about you being alone, Mom, but I was wrong. We're moving out of your house, and I'm stopping the financial support I've been giving you. Please forgive me, Mason. Isabella pleads into the phone, looking like she's praying to a deity. But my husband is no god. To Isabella right now, he's more like a devil. If you're going to apologize, it shouldn't be to me. You stole money from Abigail's wallet, which is bad enough. But the real issue is that you ate the steak Mia was looking forward to. Apologize to her. Isabella clenches her lips. She can apologize to her son, but apparently her pride won't allow her to apologize to her granddaughter. If you can't apologize, I'll have to call the police. My husband's judgment, even against his own mother, is harsh. This is one of the reasons I respect him. Isabella panics and pleads. Wait, I'll apologize, I'm sorry. After a few seconds, she says, Mia, I'm sorry for eating your steak. But my daughter's response is, "I hate you, Grandma." Isabella has lost our trust and any affection from her granddaughter. "Abigail, go get another steak for Mia. Take her to the restaurant if you want. And Mom, we're still moving out, and I'm stopping the financial support. That's not changing." My husband supports me and my daughter, while also punishing Isabella. Isabella can't say anything after that and slumps down. 3 days later, my daughter and I move out using the money my husband sent us. His business trip ends 3 weeks early, and we reunite in our new home. My daughter is thrilled to see her dad again, and so am I. Now the three of us can live happily and peacefully. As for Isabella, she lost her energy living alone and started going to a care facility. My husband is paying for it, but he says it's a lesson for himself and a form of atonement. When he had to choose between his mother and us, he chose us. Still, the guilt of neglecting his mother weighs on him. He occasionally visits the facility, but I don't say anything. He's already done enough by prioritizing us. He also said he won't provide any more support to Isabella. The importance of the saying, "Familiarity breeds contempt," was driven home to us by this incident with Isabella. She lost the people who should have been by her side because she took them for granted. It's nothing but her own fault. As I watch my daughter go off to her first day at her new middle school, I think about how the three of us will combine our strengths to live happily from now on.